The Texas sun didn't just blaze it, interrogated, bleaching the very soul from the land, leaving a cracked canvas of earth and skeletal mesquite in its merciless glare. It was under this relentless scrutiny in the heart of the wild Panhandle that a lone woman stumbled upon a man fighting for his life. He wasn't just any man. He lay sprawled in a shallow ravine, known to locals as Scorpion Hollow, and the name was well earned. Dozens of pale venomous scorpions crawled over him, yet the deadliest sting wasn't from their tails. It was the secret flowing in his blood, a secret that could ignite a war to end all wars or build a bridge between two worlds. Mae Hart saw only a man in need, unaware she was about to pull the breath of the entire Comanche nation back from the edge of death. The year was 1874. The land was the ragged edge of the Texas Panhandle, a place of brutal beauty and sudden violence. Mae knew its harsh poetry better than anyone. 2 years had passed since a rattlesnake had taken Bram from her, leaving her with nothing but 160 acres of stubborn soil, a sod-walled house that wept mud in the rain, and a silence so deep it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Bram had called this land their stake in God's country. Mae now called it her purgatory. Her days were a litany of hard labor dictated by the rise and fall of the sun. That afternoon, the heat pressed down like a living thing, shimmering in waves that distorted the horizon. One of her 2 goats, Lark, had wandered off, likely chasing some mythical patch of green. Muttering under her breath, Mae Hart followed the cloven hoofprints through dust and brittle grass canteen, sloshing at her hip. The trail led her toward jagged rocky arroyos, scars etched into the earth where water sometimes ran, but where danger always lurked. That's when she heard it, not a human cry, not a word at all, but a faint rhythmic clicking. The sound of 100 tiny nightmares. Peering over the edge of a sun-baked ravine, her blood ran cold. Down below lay a man. Stripped to a simple breechcloth, his bronze skin was a roadmap of cuts and bruises. Long black hair fanned out across the dust like spilled ink. But it wasn't just his injuries that stole Mae's breath, it was his companions. Scorpions. Dozens of them, the color of bleached bone, crawled over him, their tails arched, stingers gleaming in the harsh light. The clicking of their tiny bodies moving over rock and each other was hypnotic and terrifying. Mae's first instinct, honed by years of frontier survival, was to back away slowly. He was likely dead, and if he wasn't, he was almost certainly Comanche. Settlers spoke of them in hushed, terrified tones, ghosts on horseback, appearing without warning, vanishing without a trace, leaving only fire and sorrow behind. This man's high cheekbones and the single eagle feather in his hair screamed warrior. To intervene was likely a death sentence. Her heart hammered as she considered retreat, but then a faint twitch of his fingers, a barely perceptible flutter of his eyelids. Alive. Mae froze, a war raging in her chest. Bram had been a good man, one who believed in Christian duty, but he was gone. The frontier had taught her that compassion could be a fatal luxury. Still looking at the man, at the mercy of sun and venom, she saw not an enemy, but a human teetering on the edge of a miserable death. She thought of her own lonely existence, the crushing silence of her sod house. What was the point of surviving if it meant losing the last shred of her humanity? With a determined sigh that trembled like a sob, Mae scrambled down the loose rock of the arroyo. The scorpions scattered as her boots hit the ground, clicking frantic as they retreated into shadow. She knelt beside the man, her shadow falling across his bruised face. Younger than she first imagined, perhaps barely in his early 20s, his face carried a fierce nobility despite the slack, bruised features. A deep gash on his temple was caked with dried blood. His lips were cracked and swollen. Dehydration threatened him as surely as any venom. Mae uncorked her canteen, gently lifting his head, letting precious drops of water trickle onto his parched lips. He moaned a low guttural sound, eyes flickering open. They were dark, unfocused, yet filled with a universe of pain. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged. Getting him out of the ravine would be an ordeal. Lean, tall, dense with muscle, he was heavy, yet Mae was no stranger to toil. Dragging him up the ravine under the punishing sun nearly broke her. Looping his arm over her shoulder, half carrying, half dragging her boots, slipped on the scree. Every few steps she paused, lungs burning, glancing nervously for a war party. By the time she brought him to her homestead, the sun was a bloody smear on the western horizon. She maneuvered him into the one-room sod house and onto her narrow cot. The air inside smelled of earth and dried herbs, cool against the heat outside. In the lantern's dim glow, she finally got a proper look. His body was a canvas of violence. Beyond the cuts and exhaustion, 3 distinct puncture marks marred his leg. Red swollen scorpion stings. Inflamed, but not from the deadly bark scorpion. He had been stung early. His body had fought the venom for hours, maybe a day. What gripped Mae Hart with dread was the wound on Talec's head and the fever creeping through his skin, a silent fire threatening life itself. She moved through the night like a ghost, quiet, relentless. With carbolic soap, rare, costly, reserved for emergencies, she cleansed every cut and gash. From her memory of Bram's Irish grandmother, she crushed yarrow and plantain into a poultice, adapting the remedy for the unforgiving frontier, and pressed it gently onto Talec's stings and temple wound. She forced tiny sips of water between his lips, later following with thin broth. He drifted in and out of awareness, muttering in a language she could not decipher. The sounds were melodic, flowing, unlike the guttural, harsh tones she had imagined. In his fevered delirium, he wasn't a fearsome Comanche warrior, he was a boy lost in agony. When his eyes opened briefly and focused on her, they held no hatred, only confusion and a faint spark of gratitude. The fever soon claimed him again. At dawn, painting the plains in rose and gold, Mae Hart sat in her lone chair, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Her house was no longer silent. It was filled with the ragged rhythm of his breath. She had welcomed the most dangerous soul in Texas into her home, yet she had no clue of his identity or who might come searching. She only knew she had crossed an invisible, irrevocable line. There was no turning back. Her lonely, silent purgatory had been shattered, and a tremor of terror and perhaps salvation ran through her. The days that followed were a tense blur, a careful dance of survival and secrecy. Mae gave him a simple, solid name, Talek, easier on her tongue than the complex, fluid sounds of his fevered mutterings. For 3 days he remained mostly unconscious, a silent statue in her bed. Mae lived on edge. Every gust of wind sounded like hooves. Every shadow in the distance could be a rider. Bram's Winchester, which he had insisted she learn to wield, rested within reach. Fear was a constant bitter tang on her tongue. She harbored a dangerous secret. If a neighbor caught wind, a mob might form. If his people found him, they could see her as captor, not savior. She was terrifyingly, utterly alone in her choice. On the 4th night, Talec's fever broke in a torrent of sweat that soaked the thin mattress. Mae was at his side, wiping his brow with a cool, damp cloth. His eyes opened, and this time they stayed open. The delirium had lifted, replaced by a sharp, assessing intelligence. He looked at her, then at the unfamiliar surroundings, the rough-hewn table, the stone fireplace, the dried herbs dangling from the ceiling beams. He tried to sit alarm flashing across his face, but a wave of dizziness and pain sent him groaning back down. Mae raised a hand, a gesture meant to convey calm. "Easy now," she whispered. "You're safe." His eyes, dark and wary, narrowed. He didn't know the words, but he felt the tone. He examined the clean bandage on his head, the poultice on his leg, and slowly, cautiously relaxed. Communication was a frustrating pantomime. He would point at the water bucket. She would hand him a dipper. He indicated the stew pot. He nodded or shook his head. Every gesture was spare precise. She discovered he favored rabbit stew over salted pork. He learned the bitter drink she sipped in the mornings was called coffee. Gradually, the man behind the fearsome Comanche warrior emerged. Quiet dignity radiated from him. Every motion was efficient, precise. When he finally could stand even wounded, he moved with predator-like grace. He observed her constantly, the way she patched her dress, scanned the horizon, spoke to her goats as if they were old friends. A week later, a rider approached the homestead. Mae's heart thumped. She shoved coal into the small root cellar, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. "Get in. Now! Don't make a sound!" she hissed, voice tight with panic. Talek looked at her, understanding instantly. He slipped into the darkness silently, pulling the floorboard into place just as sharp knocks rattled the door. Mae drew a steadying breath, smoothed her apron, and opened it. It was Flint. Flint, owner of much of Redemption Wells. A man whose ambition stretched as wide and empty as the plains, wore a black suit absurdly formal for the scorching heat. Two hard-faced men on horseback, his hired guns, flanked him. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hart," Flint said, smooth and oily. He lifted his hat, slicked back hair revealed, surveying his most isolated neighbor. "I'm fine, Mr. Flint," Mae Hart said, hand gripping the doorframe, her voice steady. She didn't invite him inside. "Good to hear," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "It's a dangerous world for a woman alone out here." "I was just mentioning it to my man Jace," he said, gesturing toward a hulking figure with a scarred face. "It's a miracle you've managed so long." Flint's eyes drifted back to Mae. "Which brings me to my offer. It still stands a fair price for this patch of dust, enough to get you a nice safe room back east." Mae's voice was firm, betraying none of the fear clawing at her chest. "And I've given you my answer, Mr. Flint. This was Bram's land. It's mine now. I'm not selling." Her chin rose. She knew Flint wanted the land, and she knew it wasn't for grazing. Her well, fed by a deep spring, was the only reliable water source for miles around. Control it and he could dominate the region. Flint's smile tightened. "Stubbornness is admirable, Mrs. Hart, until it becomes foolish," he said. "There are elements out here, hostiles. Raids have been getting more frequent." A woman alone, he let the words hang heavy with threat. "I can take care of myself," Mae replied, chin high. Flint tipped his hat. "I hope so, for your sake." He turned, walking back to his horse like a predator, leaving a scent mark on the land. Mae watched until they were mere specks on the horizon. Only then did she bolt the door, sinking against it, body trembling. She let Talek out of the root cellar. He emerged silently, eyes questioning. She couldn't explain deeds, contracts, or greedy men, but he saw the menace in Flint's posture. He understood threat. That evening, as Mae cleaned her rifle, a ritual born of sharpened fear, Talek gestured for it. She hesitated. Handing a weapon to a Comanche warrior felt like ultimate folly. But his gaze was calm, unthreatening. She passed it to him. He handled it with familiarity that made her gasp. Checking the action sighting down the barrel, testing the weight, he knew the weapon intimately. Then he did something unexpected. He motioned to her, then to the rifle, gesturing, if asking her to aim. He wanted to see her use it. Slightly bewildered, she took the rifle back. She aimed at a knot on a distant fence post and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked sharply in the quiet evening. The wood splintered cleanly. Talek nodded, a flicker of approval in his dark eyes. Then he picked up a small stone from the floor. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the air. Before it fell, he drew his knife. Mae had no idea he carried one in his breechcloth. The blade spun end over end, a silver blur, striking the stone with a sharp tink, sending it flying into the dusk. Mae stared, speechless. Effortless precision. It wasn't boastful, it was a statement. He was showing her he was her protector, a warrior. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. Talek was no longer just the man she'd saved. He was a force, a wolf she'd welcomed into her fold. Standing there in the dim light of her home, Mae realized her fear was changing. She was still wary of Flint and the world beyond, but not of the man before her. Instead, a dangerous, thrilling sense of alliance stirred in her chest. The trust forged in silent gestures and shared skill deepened. Talek recovered with astonishing speed. Soon he helped with chores, his keen eyes seeing what needed attention before she even asked. He repaired fence posts with skill notches cut with a craftsman's hand. Every motion was purposeful, silent, making her own efforts feel clumsy in comparison. Their wordless communication became a language of gestures, drawings, and shared understanding. One evening, determined to bridge the chasm between them, Mae brought out a charred stick and a piece of smooth bark. She drew a crude sketch of her house. "House," she said, pointing then to her chest. "Mae," she whispered. Talek watched intently, taking the stick from her. His hand, deadly with a knife, was remarkably steady. He drew rolling hills, then a collection of teepees. He tapped the teepees, then his own chest. Next he drew a magnificent eagle wings, spread wide, tapping the eagle, then himself again. Mae's mind raced. Was eagle his name? Too simple, she thought. Then he drew a larger, more ornate teepee, and beside it, a man in a full flowing war bonnet. Authority radiated from the figure. Talek pointed to the figure and then made a gesture Mae recognized from her own culture, a slight bow of the head, a sign of deep respect. Then he drew a straight line from the man in the war bonnet to himself. The realization hit her like a blow. The man in the drawing was his father, and the war bonnet, not for just any warrior. It marked a chief, a great chief, the weight of it pressed down cold and heavy. Mae hadn't just saved a random warrior lost on the plains. The dignity she had sensed in him, the natural authority in his bearing, it wasn't merely personality. It was birthright. She was sheltering Comanche nobility. The thought was staggering far beyond the scope of her harsh, simple life. She swayed slightly dizzy. Talek wasn't finished. He took the stick again and drew a second figure beside his own. A man with a sly, jagged face. Then a snake, a rattlesnake, fangs bared behind the figure. A line connected the snake to the sly-faced man. Betrayal. An ancient story that needed no words. Someone he trusted, someone from his own people, had tried to kill him. Not defeated by a raid, not lost in a storm. Left for dead by his own kind. Mae looked at him, truly looked, and saw the pain lurking beneath the stoic facade. He was no longer just a warrior. He was an exile, a prince cast out. This knowledge reframed everything. His silence wasn't a language barrier. It was the quiet of a man who had lost his world. His vigilance wasn't mere instinct. It was the caution of someone who knew. An enemy could wear the face of a brother. This revelation cemented her resolve. Fear for her own safety now stood eclipsed by a fierce protective instinct toward him. He was no longer a potential threat to manage. He was a wronged man, a man like her, utterly alone. Life fell into a new rhythm. He began to teach her how to read the land, recognize subtle signs and animal tracks, know which plants were safe or deadly. He showed her how to find water by watching the morning flight of birds. He taught her to move silently, planting each footstep so dry earth wouldn't betray her. These were the secrets of his people, the survival skills honed on unforgiving plains, and he gave them freely. In return, she taught him her language. Pointing at objects, she named them, slowly and clearly, chair, table, fire. He was a quick study, sharp and hungry for the words, repeating them in his tongue, stumbling at first, then mastering them. The first time he spoke a full sentence in her language, his voice filled the small house with a strange, powerful intimacy. "The sky is fire," he said one evening. Looking out the open door at sunset, his baritone softer than Mae had imagined. Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she whispered, "it is." This shared language opened a new door between them. He told her his name wasn't Eagle, it was Talek, meaning sun in his tongue. The eagle was part of his identity, a spiritual link. He told her of his people, the Quahadi, the antelope eaters, the proudest and most remote of all Comanche bands. He spoke of his father, Chief Asa, a wise and respected leader, and he named the cousin who had betrayed him Naro. Mae's world expanded with each word. The Comanche were no longer a faceless, terrifying horde from neighborly tales. They were people with families, loyalties, betrayals, and love for their land and way of life. She was living among their future, though the dangers beyond were never far. Flint's pressure grew. One day Mae found one of her goat's legs broken, a deliberate cruelty. Another time her well bucket had been cut and plunged into the depths. Warnings designed to shatter her spirit and remind her of isolation. But Flint had miscalculated. Mae Hart was no longer alone. She had a prince in her sod house. Flint's petty cruelty was about to awaken a force he could never comprehend. The broken goat leg was the final provocation, a small, cruel act that spoke volumes about Flint's character. When Mae found the bleeding animal in pain, a cold, hard fury settled over her, replacing the last threads of fear. She and Talek worked in tandem, hands moving with practiced synergy to splint the leg. Talek used scavenged wood and strips of leather, his touch unexpectedly gentle. He would not let this injustice stand. Talek spoke that evening, his English growing steadier by the day. He stared into the fire, but his gaze was distant, watching not the flames, but the threat they cast. Men like Flint, they drank power like water. They are always thirsty. He thinks I'm a helpless widow. Mae Hart's voice was tight with anger. He thinks he can scare me off my land. He is wrong, Talek said plainly. It wasn't a compliment. It was fact. He had seen her resilience, the quiet strength that ran beneath her calm exterior. He rose and moved to the door, peering into the star-dusted darkness, stretching beyond the sod house. They will come again, not to warn, but to take, he said, voice low, prophetic. 3 nights later, the attack came. Mae was jolted awake by Bristle's frantic barking. It wasn't the usual yip at a coyote. This was raw panic cut off with a sickening yelp. At the same instant, Talek was on his feet, moving with fluid silence that sent a shiver through her. He seized the Winchester from its place by the door. "Get down!" he whispered, voice low and commanding. A flicker of orange danced outside the single small window. Smoke began to snake through the cracks in the door. They had set fire to her small barn, the barn that held her remaining goat Lark and 2 chickens. A message etched in flame. "Stay here," Talek ordered, eyes glinting in the dark. "Like hell I will." Mae shot back, grabbing the cult peacemaker. "This is my home." Surprise and a flicker of respect crossed his face. He nodded once. "Window, I'll take the door." Gunfire erupted, splintering the thick wooden door. Bullets thudded into the sod walls, absorbed by the dense earth. From the shouts outside, Mae could make out at least 3 distinct voices, rough, taunting. One belonged to Jace Flint's hulking henchman. "Come on out, little lady. Mr. Flint has a deed that needs signing." Jace roared, followed by cruel laughter. Talek didn't hesitate. He kicked the bar away from the door and threw it open. But instead of charging out, he dropped low and rolled into the deep shadows along the wall. So swift, so unexpected, the men outside, blinded by firelight from the barn, fired at empty space. It was all the opening Talek needed. From her vantage at the window, Mae saw a man raising his rifle. She steadied her trembling hands, recalling Bram's instructions. "Breathe out. Squeeze, don't jerk." She fired. The recoil bucked in her hand. The sound deafened the small space. The man screamed, dropped his rifle, clutching a shattered shoulder. Simultaneously, a blur erupted from the shadows outside. Talek moved like a phantom. He wasn't a brawling cowboy. He was a warrior, his combat a terrifying art. He closed the distance to a second gunman before the man could react. Mae saw the gleam of Talek's knife, a swift, precise arc. The man crumpled silently. Jace the leader bellowed in rage and shock. He spun, firing wildly, toward Talek's last known position. But Talek was gone, using the chaos and flickering firelight to vanish like a ghost in the night. Mae knew she had to act. Jace was big, dangerous, focused entirely on an invisible threat. She burst from the door, fear a distant drumbeat behind the roar of adrenaline. "Looking for him, Jace," she yelled. The hulking man spun, shock etched across his face at the sight of a widow wielding a pistol. Hesitation cost him. As his attention shifted, Talek exploded from the darkness behind him. This time he didn't use the knife he struck with the heavy Winchester stock, a brutal, efficient blow to Jace's back. The man collapsed like a sack of grain. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and the groans of the wounded. The third man Talek had dealt with lay dead. For a heartbeat they stood, chests heaving in hellish orange light. The immediate threat had passed, but a darker reality had dawned. They had crossed a point of no return. They had fought back. Flint would not send mere thugs to intimidate. He would send an army to kill. They moved swiftly. Talek bound Jace and the other wounded man with rope from the well. "They will wake." "We cannot stay," he said. "Stay." "This is my home," Mae cried, gesturing to the sod house. The dying fire, the land she had bled for. "A home is not a grave." Talek spoke that evening, his voice firm, but not unkind. He met her gaze steadily. "You saved my life, Mae Hart. Now let me save yours. We must go." She looked down at the devastation in her yard, at the bodies left behind, and she knew he was right. Her stubborn stand had ended. Flint had escalated this conflict to bloodshed. They packed what little they could, carry a sack of flour, some salted meat, her canteen, and all the ammunition she had. Talek took his knife and moved along the perimeter, scanning the darkness for threats. As the first light of dawn brushed the eastern sky, they mounted their horses and left. Mae didn't look back at the smoking ruins of her barn or the sod house she had called home. It was just a shell now, a place of memory. Her life was bound to the Comanche prince beside her, a man who had been a dying stranger weeks ago. They took the 2 remaining horses left behind by Flint's men. Talek rode with the effortless grace of a man born to the saddle. He guided them off the trails away from Redemption Wells, into the harsh, trackless wilderness of the high plains, into the heart of the Comancheria. Mae was leaving her world behind and stepping into his, not as a captive, but as an ally. She rode toward a destiny far more complex and dangerous than a mere fight for a patch of land. This was a war for the soul of a nation. The Comancheria was no empty wasteland, as she had imagined. To her settler's eyes it was daunting and featureless, but Talek read it like a book. He navigated not by trails, but by the subtle curves of the land, the shape of distant mesas, and the direction of the wind. He led them through hidden canyons and across plateaus that gave sweeping views of any potential pursuit. For days they rode in silence, conserving their strength. The grief over her lost home throbbed in Mae's chest, but the constant need for vigilance kept it at bay. She watched and learned from Talek. He taught her to listen to the silence, to tell the chirp of a cricket from a prairie dog's warning call. He showed her how to build a small smokeless fire in a rock pit, so the light couldn't be seen from afar. Her settler's dress was soon torn and useless. Using his practical knife, Talek helped her fashion a rough tunic and leggings from a spare blanket in her saddle roll. The change was more than practical, it felt symbolic. She shed the skin of Mae Hart, the homesteader, and became someone new, someone tougher, attuned to the wild land she now inhabited. Their bond, forged in violence, deepened in the shared solitude of the plains. The barriers of language and culture had been burned away in the fire at her homestead. They were now simply 2 people relying on each other for survival. One night, by a hidden fire, Mae told Talek about Bram, about their dreams, and the crushing loneliness after his death. Talek listened, steady and compassionate. When she finished, he spoke of his own loss. Naro, he said, voice low, we learned to ride the same horse. We hunted our first deer together. I did not see the snake in his heart until it struck. The betrayal was a wound deeper than any gash on his temple. Why, she asked simply. Why would he do it? He wants to be chief, Talek explained. My father Asa believes we must live with the white man, to trade, to talk, to protect our lands with strength and wisdom. Naro, he believes the only answer is war. He says peace makes us weak. He preaches fire and blood. Talek's eyes held profound sadness. He uses our people's anger, the memory of stolen lands, to fuel his own ambition. He led me into a raid, a trap. Not settlers, our own men loyal to him. The treachery shocked Mae. This wasn't jealousy. It was a coup. A few days later, Talek suddenly pulled up, his horse, hand raised for silence. He dismounted, pressing an ear to the ground. Mae held her breath. Riders, he whispered. A small group coming fast. He led them to a cluster of boulders, hiding the horses in a narrow ravine. They climbed onto the sun-warmed rocks, lying flat, peering through a narrow gap. Within minutes, 5 Comanche warriors appeared, riding with purpose. They weren't a war party, scouts only. Talek's body stiffened beside her. He recognized them. A low, sharp whistle, hawk-like, cut through the air. The lead rider snapped his head toward them immediately. The warriors fanned out, bows drawn, eyes scanning the rocks. Talek rose slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. I am Talek, he called, his voice ringing with an authority Mae Hart had never heard. The warriors froze faces, a mixture of disbelief and awe. The leader, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes, lowered his bow. Talek, he breathed as if seeing a ghost. Naro told us. He said the settlers killed you, showed us your blood on a white man's shirt, Talek continued. The lie was audacious, diabolical. Naro hadn't merely removed a rival, he had created a martyr to ignite the very war he desired. Talek scrambled down the rocks with Mae Hart moving cautiously behind him. The warriors dismounted, closing in around Talek. Relief and joy radiated from them. They spoke rapidly in their own tongue, gestures urgent, angry. The leader, Coda, kept glancing at Mae Hart, suspicion lingering in his gaze. Talek turned to her. This is Coda. He was my father's most trusted scout. Coda didn't believe Naro's story. Something about it felt wrong. He and these men had been searching not for Talek's body, but for the truth. Talek then recounted everything to Coda, the betrayal, Scorpion Hollow, how Mae Hart had saved him. He spoke of the attack on her homestead, of her courage. As he spoke, Coda's gaze toward Mae softened, shifting from suspicion to respect. But the news he brought was grim. Naro had spun the tale of Talek's death to seize effective control of the young, angry warriors. He had swayed the council, arguing that Asa's peaceful stance would lead to ruin. The final terrible piece fell into place. Naro promised the warriors a great victory. Talek's face was grim. He has promised them rifles, many rifles. A white man is delivering them in exchange for a promise. A promise that the Quahadi will drive all settlers from the southern plains. All but this one man who will control the land. Flint Mae whispered the name, tasting it like poison. It was a perfect hellish alliance. Flint would claim the land, Naro would gain the weapons and the war he craved to become undisputed war chief. They were using an entire nation, their peoples, as pawns in a game of power. Talek continued painting the dark picture relayed by Coda. In 2 days in the town, Redemption Wells Naro will bring a small force. Flint will deliver the first shipment of rifles. The trap is set. A private deal, destined to spark a public war, a firestorm consuming everything. We have to stop them, Mae said, voice trembling yet resolute. Coda and the other warriors looked at her, then at Talek. 7 people against 2 ruthless leaders and their followers. The council won't listen without proof, Talek said, thinking aloud. Naro's lies were strong. If we ride into the village, it's my word against his. He'll call me a traitor who ran to a white woman for help. He'll have me killed before the truth is heard." He gazed toward the distant haze of Redemption Wells. "The proof isn't in our village. It's there. We must show our people Naro's true nature, show them the snake he is." The plan was born of desperation. They couldn't face Flint's guns or Naro's warriors head-on. They had to be clever, turn their enemies' treachery against them. They would attend the meeting. They were walking into the Viper's Nest. Redemption Wells, a town built on greed and desperation. A dusty street lined with a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and the imposing false-fronted office of the Cane Land and Cattle Company, Flint's Kingdom. His word was law. Riding in was suicide. Walking in might just work. The plan was audacious, balanced on a knife's edge. Koda and his warriors would hide in the rocky bluffs above the town, a silent, deadly promise of reinforcement. Talek and Mae Hart would go alone. Their goal: expose a truth, detonating the alliance between Flint and Naro, in a way undeniable to all. "You will be the ghost," Talek told Mae as they prepared at the base of the bluffs. He had stripped off her makeshift tunic and leggings. In their place, he'd given her a dusty, worn riding skirt and blouse from Flint's saddlebags. Dirt smudged across her face, masking her features, making her anonymous. "You are a woman," he said. "In their world, that makes you invisible. They will not see you as a threat." "And you?" Mae asked, heart pounding. Talek smiled, a rare, grim flash of white teeth. He was no longer cold and patient. He was Talek, son of Asa. He had painted his face with 2 black lines, the mark of a man on a mission of vengeance. "I will be the whisper in the dark." They entered the town separately, dust casting long, twisted shadows down the main street. Mae Hart kept her head down, shoulders slumped, imitating the weary posture of a homesteader's wife coming in for supplies. No one spared her a glance. The town hummed with an unusual energy. More of Flint's hired guns lounged along the boardwalks, pistols conspicuous at their hips. They were expecting company. Mae's destination, the livery stable at the far end of the street beside the Cane Land Company office. According to Koda's scouting, this was where the meeting would occur, out of the saloon's prying eyes. She bought a small bag of oats from Gus, the grizzled old livery owner who barely acknowledged her, then slipped into an empty stall under the pretense of checking a lame horse. The air was thick with hay and manure. Through a grimy window, she had a clear view of the back entrance to Flint's office. Meanwhile, Talek moved through the town like smoke. He used the deepening shadows of the alleys, climbing low rooftops with cat-like agility. From the general store roof, he could see everything, the layout of Flint's men, horses tied outside the saloon, and Mae hiding in the back of the livery. An hour past sunset, the players arrived. Naro rode in not with a war party, but with 4 loyal, brutal followers. Confidence or arrogance radiated from them. They dismounted, swaggering toward Flint's office, faces hard as stone. Naro was tall, powerfully built, with a cruel twist to his mouth. A dark mirror of Talek's strength without honor. Mae watched from the livery as Flint himself, flanked by Jace with a bandaged head, came out to meet them. Jace's eyes burned with hatred for the Comanche, but he held his tongue at Flint's command. Tense greetings passed before they all disappeared into the office. The moment had arrived. The plan had 2 parts. Mae's job, a diversion, loud and undeniable, drawing everyone into the open. Talek's deliver the proof. Mae took a deep breath, hand closing around a small, sharp awl hidden in her sleeve. In the next stall was Flint's prize stallion, a magnificent black creature, spirited and ill-tempered, the linchpin of her plan. Whispering an apology to the animal, she unlatched the stall, slipped inside, and jabbed its flank with the awl. The reaction was instant. The stallion screamed, a force of pure panic. Kicking it, splintered the stall wood and burst into the livery aisle. It charged into the street, 1,000 pounds of terrified horse, galloping past the saloon and scattering Flint's men, who shouted and cursed while scrambling for cover. The back door of Flint's office flew open. Flint, Jace, and Naro's warriors spilled out, drawn by the chaos. "What in damnation is going on?" Flint bellowed. "Get that horse!" All eyes fixed on the rampaging beast. No one noticed the shadow detach from the rooftop across the street. Talek dropped into the alley behind Flint's office landing silently. The single guard at the back door turned, but too late. Talek disabled him quietly and slipped inside the now empty office. On Flint's desk, a crate lid pried open filled with gleaming new repeater rifles. Next to it lay a document, a map. Mae's old homestead, marked with an X, vast surrounding lands, outlined in Flint's neat script. The deal codified on paper, the price of a war. Outside, chaos reached its peak. Naro smirked, enjoying the white men's incompetence. Flint shouted orders. Mae knew it was her cue for part 2 of the diversion. She lit a lantern's wick and hurled it into the driest hay pile in the livery. The hay ignited with a whoosh. Flames roared upward, licking the dry timber roof. "Fire!" Mae screamed at the top of her lungs, playing the terrified woman perfectly. The cry of fire was a death knell in a dry wooden town. Flint's men, torn between the horse and the blaze, fell into chaos. The fire spread quickly, casting hellish dancing light over the scene. Into this chaos, Talek emerged. Not from the alley, but walking calmly out the front door of Flint's office into the main street. In his hands, one of the new rifles and the map. Everything froze. Men chasing the horsemen, fighting the fire, all halted. Naro and his warriors spun, eyes wide with shock. Naro Talek's voice carried calm and authority over the crackle of flames. He held up the rifle. "You told our people the white man was our enemy, yet you come here to take their weapons." Naro stared as if a ghost had risen from the dead. "You—" he stammered. "I am here," Talek said, eyes sharp like chips of obsidian. He held up the map. "You promised our warriors a war to reclaim our lands, yet you were selling them to this man." He pointed at Flint. "For a handful of guns to make yourself chief." A low murmur ran through Naro's 4 followers. Their eyes darted from Talek to the rifle, to the furious, trapped expression on Naro's face. The truth was stark and undeniable in the firelight. "He lies," Naro roared, desperation in his voice. "He is a traitor, kill him." But his warriors hesitated. They had seen the proof in Talek's hands. They had seen Naro meeting with their sworn enemy. The seed of doubt was planted. Flint, seeing his plan unravel, barked orders. "Kill them all!" The street erupted into chaos, but not the fight Flint had expected. From the bluffs above, a hawk's cry signaled the descent of Coda and his 4 warriors. Silent, deadly arrows, they picked off Flint's scattered men with uncanny precision. The fight on the street became a desperate, swirling melee. Mae Hart took cover behind a water trough, firing at any of Flint's men who tried to reach Talek. Jace charged, twisted across his face. "I'll kill you myself, witch," he bellowed. Mae stood her ground, firing twice. The big man staggered, slowing before finally collapsing into the dust. The real battle was between the 2 cousins. Naro, screaming in fury, drew a massive hunting knife and lunged at Talek. It was brutal, personal, muscle and steel colliding in a whirlwind. This was no longer about land or guns. It was about honor, betrayal, and the soul of the Quahati people. Talek was faster, fluid, but Naro was pure rage made flesh. They rolled in the dust, trading blows. Finally, Talek twisted Naro's own momentum against him, gaining the upper hand. He pinned his cousin to the ground, knife at his throat. "Tell them the truth." Talek grunted, face inches from Naro's. "Tell them you left me to die." Naro spat. "You are weak. Your peace would have destroyed us." The fight was over. Flint's remaining men were dead or fled. Coda and his warriors stood over Naro's defeated men. Flint himself, seeing his empire of dirt turning to ash, tried to slink into the shadows, but Coda blocked him with the point of a lance. The town glowed under the burning livery. Talek stood over his defeated cousin, breathing heavily. He had won. The lie was exposed. But looking around at the chaos, the bodies in the street, and the terrified faces of townsfolk peeking from windows, he knew the war was far from over. This was only the first shot fired. In the flickering light of the burning livery, chaos gave way to a grim, silent reckoning. Flint's sputtering threats and empty promises was cornered by the very people he had terrorized. At Mae Hart's sharp-tongued condemnation, fear turned to rage, and the townsfolk dragged him away to face swift frontier justice. But the true judgment was between the two cousins. Talek stood over Naro, not with vengeance, but with cold resolve. "You will not die by my hand," Talek declared, voice ringing with the authority of a chief. "You will face the council for your lies. You will live with dishonor. For a warrior, a fate worse than death." As dawn's first light painted the sky, it was time to part. The gap between their worlds, briefly bridged by survival, now seemed impossibly wide. "You must go back," Mae said, her words tight with emotion. "Your people need you, and you must rebuild." Talek replied softly, "The land is yours. You fought for it with the heart of a warrior." He reached into a pouch and drew a single perfect eagle feather. "This is for a debt that can never be repaid for my life." She took at the fingers brushing his. The brief touch was a painful reminder of what they could never be. "Will I see you again?" she whispered. Talek looked to the rising sun, sadness in his eyes. "The sun rises every morning, and the earth is always here to meet it. We do not live in the same house, Mae, but we share the same sky." With a final lingering glance, he mounted his horse. Joined by Coda and his warriors, he led the prisoners from the wounded town and rode east, a prince returning to his kingdom. Mae Hart stood alone in the dusty street, the eagle feather tight in her hand. Her home was gone, reduced to ashes, but her spirit had been reforged in fire. She had found a dying man in Scorpion Hollow and discovered a prince. In saving him, she had saved herself. Turning her back on the ruined town, she faced the long road to her land. Not a lonely widow anymore, but a woman who understood her own strength, forever bound to the Comanche prince who shared her sky. The West is full of stories like this, tales of courage and conflict that never made it into the official records. The story of Mae Hart and Prince Talek stands as proof that the deepest divides can be bridged by the simplest acts of compassion. It reminds us that enemies are often just people whose stories haven't been told, and that true strength lies not in building walls, but in having the courage to open a door. Their tale shows that even in a land defined by violence and prejudice, a bond forged in respect and trust could shift the course of history, one small forgotten homestead at a time. Could two people from such different worlds ever find lasting peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this glimpse of the untamed West moved you, give the video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a true story of grit and unlikely alliances. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the untold dramas of the American frontier. Thank you for listening. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.